Okay, this is our third series of webinars. I'm William Stockdale, Chair of Thornton Street History Group, although I think most of you know me by now, so you can call me Bill. I respond better to that name. Tonight, we're really fortunate and delighted to welcome back Al Oswald, and Al is going to be talking to us about a local subject, and this is Malton Roman Fort, what happened next, and he's going to also talk to us about the research by the University of York. As always, we welcome your questions, but do type them into the Q&A box. Only use chat if you've got a problem or something that you really need to tell us about. Yeah, we are, as always, time limited. We might not get every question answered. We'll do our very, very best. So I'll now hand you over to Al.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'll just share my screen. I noticed immediately before we started that the lampshade behind me looks as though I'm wearing a small hat, and I now can't unsee that looking at myself, so I'm going to try and concentrate on the screen ahead of me. Anyway, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is primarily not the Roman fort, actually, but what happened after the Roman fort. And I think it's that narrative of change through time, which, as many of you who know me will know, that's what really interests me. I'm not a digging archaeologist these days. So regrettably, I've got to start with a sharp reprimand for the organising team. We always tell our students at York not to use information from Wikipedia, and apparently the little introduction to my talk that I sent in was a couple of lines short. So someone burrowed into Wikipedia and started prefaced my little introduction by saying that Malton was known in the Roman period as Deventio Brigantium. But actually, as long ago as 2006, one of our local Romanists, Pete Wilson, argued that name actually applied to the base at Stamford Bridge, and that the base at Malton was called Delgovicia. So there we are. Don't use Wikipedia, any of you. I don't know how many of you have actually visited the Roman fort at Malton. It's in this sort of rather unused little green space on the northeastern outskirts of Malton. There's no convenient parking, so it's more a space that's used by local people, I suppose. I say one space, it's actually two really, because as you can see from this image, the sort of northeastern half is more or less in a grassy field, and the southwestern half is mostly wooded, although part of it lies in the grounds of the old Lodge Hotel, which I expect most of you will have driven past. So this is more or less where the fort lies. The roads on the northeast, southeast and northwest are relatively well known. The one that comes out of the fort on the southwest, actually on reflection, probably doesn't go straight as I've put it there. The gradient is so steep heading in that direction that it probably went more back in towards the centre of Malton. The vicus, the civilian settlement, is reasonably well known on the southeast side from excavations in the 1950s, and on the southwest side from excavations in the 1990s. And we know that there were pretty high status townhouses in both places with, sort of posh wall plaster, and surviving surprisingly well on the southeast side of the fort, almost sort of waist height in places. On the northeast, it's never been excavated there. The thing that you can see running from northwest to southeast towards the river is the line of the railway that was built in 1851 and closed in 1964. And that sliced right through the corner of the fort and also through a section of the vicus as well. What we did know about the civilian settlement, the vicus, was known through aerial photography and through geophysical survey. And it was clear that the road ran out, it actually runs out across Moulton cricket pitch as well, and the rugby fields. You can still see it as an earthwork there. But actually, it was quite clear from the aerial photography. In particular, there were building plots on both sides of the road, some running down towards the river and tailing out, but quite busy activity on the northwest side of the Roman road. And you'll see that there's a bit of a gap between the known remains and the fort, and indeed the railway line. So the area we were interested in looking at through excavation was this long strip down the edge of what is now an arable field, partly because that was nice and convenient in terms of not disturbing too much of the crop, and partly because, as I said, this was a sort of blank area in our knowledge. And we excavated over 4 seasons. These are the first 3, and you can see it's, you'll have to twist your heads to get the angle right, but you can see that we did quite a thorough investigation of that strip. And on the right hand side of the screen as you're looking at it, is an aerial photograph, or a drone photograph at least, of the trenches we dug in 2017. So just to make it clear where those lie, it's that strip down the edge of the old disused railway line. And in fact, the attentive of you will notice that you can actually see the crop marks of some of our trenches in that field, because this aerial photograph was taken after those were dug. And if you're thinking, oh, I can see stuff within the Roman fort, actually that's mostly mowing marks and pathways that you can see there. That's not archaeological. So just to give you some indication quickly of the sorts of things we were finding, the late Roman occupation adjacent to the road came in the form of long, thin plots, almost like sort of burgage plots, running back away from the road. The ground had been terraced on both sides of the road, and there were these high quality domestic buildings, probably with sort of shops on the ground floor as well, as far as we could tell. We had internal divisions and floors, and as you can see, the walls survived several courses high, which is quite impressive, much better than we were expecting. In fact, in that bottom photograph, you can also see that one of the stones built into the wall there is a small Roman millstone, a quernstone. So once those broke or became worn down, they were quite often used as walling. And in the top photo on the left there, you can see the collapsed stone roof slates, and that's always a good sign, because it means that they will actually protect the interior of the building. So this isn't, in this case, this isn't a building that's been deliberately dismantled. It is a building that's actually sort of fallen down. So quite interesting in terms of the end of the site. I hope this photo gives you some idea of just how thin the plough soil is above these remains. So this is a drain, open in the foreground, but you can see covered by slabs in the background there. And it's only really a sort of handspan's depth beneath the turf. So this is, I mean, it's not proper turf actually. It's just the sort of weedy edge along the edge of the field. So part of the reason that Historic England allowed us to excavate there was the anticipation that these remains would be in serious danger of being obliterated by modern ploughing over the course of the next few decades. So it's a sort of no-brainer really. You either excavate it now while it's in reasonably good condition, or you wait for it to be destroyed gradually. The drain that you can see here is also in the top of this image. This is another drone image. A lot of our site recording is done by drone these days. So you can see the bit of the section of the drain that's in the foreground of the left-hand photo, in the top right there. And you can see that it's running towards this building, which at first we thought had a hypercaust in it because it had these pillars. But in the end, we decided there was no evidence of burning on them, and it was probably more likely to be a granary type or store building of that sort. But again, you can see quite impressive survival, because those survive about 0.5 metre high, just below the surface. I said it's being ploughed today. It was also ploughed in the Middle Ages, as we'll see later on, and that too has done its fair share of damage. So most of the really well-preserved bits that we can see lay beneath the ridges of the medieval ridge and furrow. Where the furrows have cut through, the preservation is much worse. There was a fair smattering of bodies for those who like skeletons. I think they will tell us a good deal more in due course, because none of the analysis has been done yet. But suffice to say that they were quite consistent in the styles of burials. There were sort of a shared alignment, and the grave rites were pretty similar. In one case, we made the, with hindsight, stupid error of leaving it open overnight. And when we came back the following morning, even though we'd covered it up and hidden it as well as we could, most of the bones had been filched, which was a great pity. This is a woman, I think I'm right in saying it's a woman, who's got an armband round her upper arm. So they were going into the grave with their best finery on, and we were pleased to recover that. This is another item that came from one of the shop-like areas. It's a weighing scale made of bronze, and it's in immaculate condition. And this image is not a particularly good one. I was right next to it when it came out of the ground, and I should have photographed it at that stage and got a much better image. But this was the only one that we seem to have in the department at the moment. It's gone off for conservation now. But what I want to talk about mainly tonight is the area outlined in orange here, which is the area that I looked at with the undergraduates. So these were, I should have said, these were training excavations for the first year undergraduates, and they went on for 3 weeks each early summer. But in the depths of winter, or at least March, I took the undergraduates out there to train them in doing analytical field survey. In other words, looking at everything you can see on the surface, not just the humps and bumps, but also the vegetation, the walls, really everything you can see with the naked eye. And it's exactly the same sort of process that many of you have gone through with me on the site of Thornton-le-Street. And Malton being a relatively well-known fort, you'd assume that it would have seen that the earthworks, which are quite prominent and, you know, in some cases more than head high, that they would have seen quite a lot of research already, being the most obvious evidence for what went on in the past. But in fact, almost no research has been done into them at all, it turned out. I was very surprised to find that the only attempt at a detailed survey of the humps and bumps was done by Vivian Swan back in 1981, and she used to work for my former employers, the Royal Commission on the Historical Monuments of England. But her expertise was really as a pottery specialist. So although she's done a creditable job of this earthwork survey, it turned out there was a lot more to come out of the remains that you can see with the naked eye. We do have these days the benefit of LiDAR, which I assume you all know what it is, light detection and ranging, and it's a good high resolution, half-meter resolution, which allows us to generate images like this one, which are certainly very revealing. You can see all sorts of little humps and bumps in addition to the major earthworks of the ramparts and so on. But just as we did at Thorntonley Street, I insisted that the students went back to basics and actually got out tape measures and looked with their eyes. And the underlying message of tonight's talk, I suppose, is that there is a big advantage to doing that. And what I'm going to do is go through a series of case studies as to why LiDAR isn't enough and why just looking with your eyes carefully on the ground can often reveal a lot more than LiDAR. And again, in terms of recording what we saw, we did it in the very lowest tech way possible, just with pencil and paper, working at a scale of 1 to 1,000, just as we did to complete the very fine plan that appears in the book that Bill will no doubt be advertising later. And this is the end result of our work. And you'll see there are big white gaps in it still. And that's because we had anticipated doing one more season there, which would have filled in all those gaps. But of course, along came COVID and everything stopped at that point, unfortunately. So this is still a work in progress. We do need to now get some funding from an external source to go back and finish those little areas that need finishing, because the university has moved on, in a sense, in terms of its training dig. The university department will be moving to Skipsea next year, which is a considerably bigger commute. So for those of you who haven't encountered detailed earthwork plans like this one before, those little black tadpoles are called hashers, and they've been used since the end of the 18th century to depict slopes. And the advantage of them over things like LiDAR is that you can build in your interpretations. So whereas LiDAR can often be very difficult to tell what comes first and what comes later, with the naked eye you can often figure that out. And these plans will actually explicitly make clear to people who know how to read them what comes first and what comes later, in other words, the stratigraphy. We also carried out geophysical surveys over the more lawned part of the site. And again, this has yet to, so this is unprocessed data at the moment. My colleague, Dr. Helen Goodchild, who some of you met at Thorntonley Street, assures me that once this is processed, it will be absolutely breathtaking in terms of what you can see in the interior of the fort particularly. So you can probably see there are various little sort of rectangular things going on in the interior. Once it's been processed fully, I think this will resolve itself into a whole load of very clear barracks blocks and granaries and so on. And you can also see some of the buildings on the bottom of the fort as we're looking at it, which are the townhouses of the civilian settlement. In due course, if we do get the funding to do so, we'd like to go into the woods in the area known as Castle Gardens and do some further survey there, because it is sufficiently open that some geophysical techniques will actually be pretty rewarding, we hope. So that's the story in terms of the Roman site, in a way. The dig confirmed, in a sense, what we were expecting, that there was late Roman, lots of late Roman occupation, quite a busy civilian settlement, but really no massive surprises. On the other hand, the work that we did in and around the fort itself turned up quite a lot of surprises. And it's that really that I want to talk about tonight. In the past, as is typically the case with Roman sites, attention has been very focused on the Roman period, and that's all well and good. But actually, what we have found out now about later activities on the site not only contributes to our understanding of the later history of the site, but also tells us about what to expect of the Roman remains and to interpret them better. So it's a two-pronged attack. So this is the first of our case studies, I suppose. This is the northeastern rampart, which on the LiDAR looks pretty straightforward. You can see some little dimples along the top of it. Some of those are the holes left by fallen trees. Some of them are the holes left by antiquarian excavations, or rather excavations from the 1920s. I don't think you can quite term that antiquarian. And some of the more prominent rectangular looking ones are slit trenches dug in the Second World War, at the time when the railway and the bridge over the River Derwent were still in active use. The River Derwent was an anti-tank stop line, and those slit trenches around the perimeter of the Roman fort, of which there are about half a dozen, we think were probably designed to protect the bridge crossing, which of course in the event of a German invasion would have been blown up pretty quickly. But if we look at that on the ground, what appears to be just a single straightforward bank actually turns out to be quite a lot more complicated. The middle part of it, if you like, is what's left of the Roman rampart, but even that, we're not looking at the Roman defences as they were originally built. What we're looking at is the remains of the Roman earthwork after the stone wall that would have existed. The fort wall has been completely dismantled and removed. So we're looking at a sort of slumped earthwork, what was left presumably not that long after the Roman period. But the bottom of that slope has been distinctly sharpened up. You can see it's a slightly sharper gradient, and that's by plough damage caused in the medieval period, cutting in. So if we go back to the previous slide, you can see that sort of corrugated surface on the right-hand side of the image is classic medieval ridge and furrow. In other words, ploughing by oxen. These broad ridges, each one was effectively a separate field, worked by a separate peasant family. So those run up to the fort, but no further, and that's something we'll look at again in due course. So a bit of plough damage at the bottom, but the really interesting thing is right on the top, where a very tiny bank has been built on top of the Roman bank. Now, you can see I've put question mark Norman refortification, and the reason for that is its relationship to this earthwork down here. Now, this has usually been thought of as a probable late Roman outwork, as the civilian settlement came under threat from marauding tribes from across the seas. They felt they had to defend it a bit better and perhaps sort of retreated behind a new defence. Philip Corder, who's carried out some of the most thorough excavations on the Roman fort back in the late 20s, he put a trench across this. In fact, you can just about see that trench if you look carefully, running just straight across the line of the bank. And if that is his trench, if that is indeed his trench, it's not quite where he thought he put it, which is not atypical for the time. But in his report on his excavations, he literally sums up the results from that trench in a single sentence, and he describes the finds as being a medley of pottery and other material. Now, it's not even clear from that whether it's Roman pottery or later pottery, but the word medley makes me think that that might have been medieval material in there. In other words, that probably gives rise to his lack of interest in the whole thing. He felt it was sullied or contaminated by medieval interference. A more interesting possibility is that what we're looking at is a refortification of the Roman perimeter, plus an outwork running down, presumably, to the edge of the river. And there are a couple of things that make me think that. The first is that this very slight bank, which is then continued by the larger bank outside the fort, actually runs over the top of the infilled Roman ditch on that southeast side of the fort. So, in other words, the Roman defensive ditch of the fort had already become completely filled in and almost levelled at that point before this bank was built. The other thing is that we can trace this bank not just in a straight line along the northeastern side of the fort, but also returning. So as far as we have traces of the Roman earthwork, we have a later earthwork built on top of it. It's not always well preserved, but it's there all the way around. And that distinction between potentially a bailey and agricultural land outside may well be the reason why the ridge and furrow that you can see very clearly in this image stops at that bank. If there was a bailey, there was a motte. Now, one possibility is that the motte was this area, and this is where LiDAR comes into its own. And actually, I've rather obscured it with that circle, I'm sorry about that. But there is, in this area, a very broad mass of material. You can see it most clearly where some of the estate buildings are actually cut into it, and you suddenly realise that there's a metre or more of material sort of built up there into which these buildings are cutting. So it's not obvious with the naked eye when you first look, but you can use LiDAR to bring out this sort of thing rather clearly. So one possibility is that the motte was here and was, for whatever reason, subsequently flattened out. So this would have put the motte in a rather good position, sitting next to an existing Roman gateway, overlooking the medieval road. So the medieval road shifts to what is now Old Moulton Gate in the top left of this image, shifts a lot away from the line of the Roman road. So a motte here would have been both making best possible use of the Roman earthworks, the pre-existing Roman earthworks, and controlling the gateway and controlling the road into Malton itself. And the existence of a timber castle, timber motte and bailey, has been speculated about before, but without any physical evidence. So it's thought to have been built by Ivo de Vessi at some point in the latter end of the 11th century. And this is quite a common pattern that you find reuse of Roman forts for bailies. I mean, it happens in York, amongst other places. And in fact, all across the Staingate, there are examples of this being done again and again. So that's one possibility. We'll come to the other later. This thing's rather interesting. I'd been to Malton several times before we started the detailed survey and noticed this bank running away from the northeastern gateway, and I assumed it was the embankment of the Roman road because it's about the right sort of width. But when we scrutinised it in detail, two things became clear. One, that it wasn't at all regular like a Roman road should be, and two, that it was actually sitting on top of the medieval ridge and furrow. In other words, it couldn't possibly be anything to do with the Roman road. And having mapped it in detail, it became clear that what we were looking at was a series of spoil dumps, rather like the sort of thing you find on industrial sites, but in this case with people pushing wheelbarrows and dumping their spoil. Their spoil from what? Well, one of the things that Philip Corder excavated in the late 1920s was the Northeast Gateway. So what we're looking at is his spoil heap. That's quite valuable information in a way, because although he kept what would now be considered the diagnostic bits of pottery and the interesting finds, I'd be prepared to bet that a lot of material was missed. If you went to Historic England and said, we'd like to dig a large chunk just next to the northeastern gateway, they'd ask you to make a really strong case for it before they agreed. If, however, you asked to re-excavate the spoil from a late 1920s excavation and see what added information you could get from that, they would open their arms and allow you to continue straight away. So as you can see, the northeast gateway started, well, it was quite well preserved for a start. It started with a single entrance, moved to a double entrance, and then back to a single entrance later in its life. Having told people not to borrow images from Wikipedia, I stole this from the Discovery Channel, which is why it's so blurry. The only serious investigation that's attempted to look at the post-Roman landscape here was by Time Team in 1997, and my former colleague and good friend Stuart Ainsworth was involved in that, and in fact he suggested that the Roman fort might have been reused in the Middle Ages, but he again didn't have any evidence that he could positively put his finger on in the course of the 3-day investigation. So obviously, with the benefit of several years of squinting at this, we've gone a bit further. But I did, because of my continuing friendship with Stuart, I did manage to drag him back and get him to look at the site again. Now, Time Team's investigation was really to try and find the site of an early 12th century stone castle, which the documents tell us was built by Eustace Fitzjohn when he married Beatrice de Vesey in the early 12th century. And Time Team's initial effort was led by this map made in the 1830s by Captain Copperthwaite, who was the land manager, the estate manager for the Fitzwilliam estates. And you can see there, it says, site of the castle built on Roman foundations. Now, this area was very heavily overgrown when Time Team went there in 1997. So it's to Stuart's credit, really, that he recognised that what he was looking at on the ground was not the site of a castle at all, but actually post-medieval garden earthworks. So what he was looking at that Captain Copperthwaite had surveyed were these big terraced walkways running round the edges of a square garden compartment. Now, when I dragged Stuart back, we did all this survey within what is now Castle Gardens because, frankly, it was too difficult for the students to do, and it was quite dangerous in some ways with falling trees and things. So we did this together, and the one area of the garden layout where it isn't so regular is on this edge area where I've circled it in red. And there are funny things going on there. And I suspect that this was where the 12th century castle was, in that area. The green splodges and trenches on this are where Time Team put their trenches. So you'll see they successfully missed by a country mile where we now think the castle sat. In this position, it's quite different from the earlier motte, the 11th century motte. It's moved westwards to the edge of the escarpment, and in that position, I think probably a stone castle was probably as much a sort of grand house as a castle, really, and it would have overlooked the marketplace of Malton, overlooked the river crossings and so on. So quite a different set of strategic aims from the 11th century motte. So where was the great house that went with those post-medieval gardens? We know that there was a house. It was built for Lord Yuri in 1604, finished in about 1608, and demolished a very short time later, really, in about 1675, when two cousins inherited the estate, and according to folklore at least, I still haven't quite established how far this is based on fact. I smell the whiff of sexism and petty jealousy about it. But according to the story, they couldn't agree over which of them was going to inherit the house. So it went to court, and the judge, in a sort of judgment of Solomon, commanded them to dismantle the whole building and sell off the materials and take half the profits each, which was evidently done. Another way of interpreting that potentially is that they very sensibly asset stripped the house that was far too grand. This was, when it was built in the early 1600s, was a really pretentious house, really grand, described as one of the grandest in the north of England. So it may not have suited them by 1675 to have such an enormous pile. There are some interesting other things marked on this map. Down here we have the remains of a bath. That's the Lady Spring. So it's a perfectly plausible place to put a bathhouse. How far you can see that there appears to be an actual building shown on that as marked as bath. How far this is based in reality and how far on speculation is not quite clear. But that's something that could certainly be investigated archaeologically. Unfortunately, it's now got a warehouse more or less on top of it. Another interesting thing is what appears to be a building up in this top corner, and I haven't yet managed to see the original of this map to see what the annotation next to it says, but there clearly is a building there. And that building was excavated by Philip Corder again in the late 1920s, and this is what he found. But the implication is that this was visible on the surface in the early 1800s. So yes, who knows what's happened in the intervening period. And in terms of our question about where the house stood, we do have this annotation, where Lord Yuri's mansion stood, very helpfully. And if you look in the background there, you can see a sort of pecked outline of a square structure right in the middle of that compartment. And that is probably the best indication, certainly better than Lord Copperthwaite's plan of where Lord Yuri's house stood. The gatehouse is the old lodge, is still a hotel, it's still there. So it wasn't as if the whole property was demolished and dismantled. The little, rather mean little front door there, you can see sits within a much bigger archway. What you're looking at there is the carriageway through, or the original carriageway through would have been the big arch to the house beyond. So you'd have gone through this gatehouse and into almost immediately been confronted by the frontage of the big house. The Luftwaffe was only formed in 1935, so they did very well to get out here and photograph it for us that same year. There's the old lodge. You can see in the background the rather sort of formal arrangements of the garden at that time, which are a sort of, in a ghostly way, a reflection of what was going on in the 17th and 18th centuries. But somewhere in that area, between the gatehouse and the mature trees you can see in the background, was Lord Yuri's house. Well, the gatehouse is the red rectangle at the top of this image. What we had were 3 garden compartments, not quite regular because they're confined within a promontory effectively. So each one's a little longer as it approaches the edge of the escarpment there. And you can see that one of those terraces is almost but not quite on the line of the Roman fort perimeter. And in fact, we were able to trace a remnant of the Roman fort perimeter directly underlying the post-medieval terrace. So presumably quite well preserved under that. Now, when you've got 3 garden compartments like this, you know you're onto a pattern. And in fact, we have this wonderful image of 1728 by Thomas Bowles, and on the right of this you can actually see those three garden compartments and the old gate lodge. So even after the demolition of the house in 1675, it's clear from this that the gardens, the original gardens, were being maintained pretty well, presumably as part of as the gardens of the rather diminutive gate lodge, diminutive by comparison, it's a bit bigger than my house. But so we have this opportunity really to put very detailed documentary evidence together with rather detailed earthwork evidence as well. So we could, from this, calculate exactly where all these rather neatly pruned bushes and paths were. Incidentally, those bushes and paths, like that sort of very formal garden, are really coming to the end of their fashion in 1728. Within a few decades, they would have been swept away by the more naturalistic trend in English garden design. So the three compartments that we've got as earthworks, actually, when we've finished the whole survey, we hope we'll be able to identify the boundaries. In fact, I'm absolutely sure we will be able to identify the boundaries of another 6 compartments, because this is a well-known pattern. And within this, Stuart calculated that the house could have sat just about there. So he's used a combination. This is his plan from 1997, which thankfully he's very good at archiving things. So he just fished that out of his filing cabinet, and so he calculated that this would have been where the house sat, overlooking the central one of those garden compartments, and flanked on either side by the bowling green and the orchard. Sorry, the kitchen garden and the orchard, because again, this is a fairly well-known template for this sort of house. So we have a strong indication of what each of these compartments would have been used for. And that is pretty much the end of my 3/4 of an hour. This slide is taken from the end of a short film, which some of you may have seen already, which is available on the Department of Archaeology's YouTube channel. And the film is primarily about how to do field survey, how to do earthwork survey. So that might interest you, because I know you're still continuing to do earthwork survey at Thornton Street and possibly elsewhere. But it's also the story of Moulton Fort and what went on there. Just to conclude, I could have, I go back one, I could have mentioned those 3 circular things at the top of the screen there. Those are Victorian flower beds that were put in when the Lord Fitzwilliam hosted the Great Yorkshire Show there for a few years in the late 1890s, I think it was. I could also have mentioned that the house, or at least the gate lodge rather, what's left of the house, became the nerve centre for the chain home low network. In other words, the radar network that covered the whole of the eastern and southern coasts of England, making it absolutely unique and far more worthy of preservation in some ways than the Roman fort, ironically, and yet virtually unknown. So, as this says, there's a great deal more here than just the Roman fort. Each of those later phases is, in my mind, interesting and worthy of study in its own right. But also those later phases of activity affect how the Romans survived, and therefore how we can go about investigating them best. So ignoring those later developments is something you do at your peril. Understanding the big narrative of the site through time is, in many ways, greater than the sum of the parts. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Al. It was really interesting. Come on, don't be shy, people. Put your questions in Q&A. I've got a few to start off. How likely is it you think that you'll be able to get some money to go back and investigate?
I think the long and short of it is that it needs doing, and if we don't get the money, I'll have to go back in an unpaid capacity. But yes, it would be spoiling the ship for a ha'porth of tar to leave it at this stage. So the hotel is pretty keen for us to go into their gardens. They don't mind at all, and that is an area where geophysics would be extremely easy to do because it's now all open lawns. Whereas back in 1997, when Time Team visited, a lot of that area was pretty scrubby too. And we could even get into the area of Castle Gardens where there are lots more mature trees. And although magnetometry, which is the technique where you walk along going beep, 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 beep very quickly, that would be very difficult to do there because you need to be able to walk in straight lines and to get consistent speed and readings. What we could do there is earth resistance survey, which would tell us a great deal more about ditches and walls and things like that. So potentially some very interesting findings would come out of that, despite the big trees and so on.
Mm. Would there be a chance for the students to do that, or is everything going to be transferred to Skipsea?
You know, it's very strange actually. Very often students who've wanted to dig for years, after their first week or so, decide they don't like it that much after all. So I suspect it would be quite difficult to drag any of them out there. But in the interests of finishing quickly and getting the job done to the same standards as the rest of the survey, I think we'd probably let them go and do their own thing at Skipsea, and it would just be me and Dr. Goodchild toiling away in the winter.
Right, we have some questions from our audience. Brian Elsey asks, is there any evidence of prehistoric occupation of the site?
Anecdotally, yes. So in the excavations, certainly a few worked flints came up. But that's a very good question, actually, because I think what the bit of the equation that we know nothing about at the moment is what was going on there before the Roman period. So the fort is plonked there partly in relation to the Roman roads, partly in relation to the river, which was navigable up to that point and a little beyond. But it seems very likely that there must have been some form of native settlement or stronghold nearby, which the fort was designed to dominate. Excuse me. And so we don't know anything about what was going on there in the late Iron Age. And as we go back further and further still, no, we know next to nothing about what was going on there. So we have these odd anecdotal flints, but very little else.
David Breer asks, what would the cost of the extra research be?
Well, not very expensive, to be honest. A few thousand, probably.
Margaret Shaw comments, perhaps Moulton Museum could help in some way.
I think we have worked very closely with Malton Museum, and you know, a lot of the finds that the excavations have produced will end up there. Mm-hmm. We collaborate with them on doing things like their Roman open day that they did, the first one of earlier this year. But I think that, like all museums these days, they are really strapped for cash, so they will probably need to, and they do have grand plans, as you probably know, to move and reform themselves into a much more accessible unit. So I think they'll probably want to keep all their funds for that.
Right. Gilbert Mackay asks, when was the railway laid and were there any finds found then?
Yes, indeed. It was built in 1851, I think, or maybe that was the year it was completed. I'm not exactly sure. But yes, there were reports in the local press of finds, and we do have an annotated plan from, I can't remember when it was made offhand, but not long after that, which records, might have been one of Captain Copperthwaite's, I can't remember, but he actually recorded the find spots of the stuff that came up in the railway cutting. In fact, if you walk along the railway cutting, you can see the Roman ditch, the northwestern side of the fort. The Roman ditch there was came sort of straight through into the cutting, and the whole corner of the ditch was cut away by the railway cutting. So there's a big sort of dip in the limestone, which is the Roman ditch. Yeah, there was quite a lot found, and as ever with these Victorian finds where they're putting railway cuttings and things in, it makes you scream slightly to think of what you could have got out of it these days. But we're fortunate in a way that it just clipped the corner of the Roman fort and didn't do any more serious damage. It's worth saying as well that at the bottom end of the where the cutting turns into an embankment, that embankment buried the medieval ridge and furrow, which was still surviving at that point. So under that meters and meters of embankment and half a meter of medieval plough soil, the Roman remains there should be extremely well preserved, better almost than anywhere else, I would imagine.
Right. Graham Story asked, is there any indication of Anglian settlement in the fort or the vicus?
Indeed there is, yes. Actually, that was perhaps something I should have dwelt on slightly longer. The excavations in, I think it was 2017, found what appeared to be the remains of a sort of packed floor sitting on top of the demolished Roman buildings with post holes. So there was no artifactual evidence in support of the interpretation, but it looks as though this was a building which came between the demolition of the Roman fort and the development of ridge and furrow ploughing, which presumably took place at the end of the 10th century or early in the 11th. So yes, that could well be an Anglian building. Anglian settlement is, one building doesn't make a settlement, does it?
Right.
But it is the first time that we've got that kind of evidence, so that is quite exciting.
Because Steve Treese asks a similar question, what happened on the site between the end of the Roman occupation and the early Norman period? So you have a building anyway.
Yeah, I think the other thing that happened probably is a lot of stone robbing. So obviously the name Malton is a Toon name, so that's an early medieval name. Presumably, a lot of the stonework was being dismantled and taken elsewhere for use in buildings in what is now Malton, and the sort of centre of the settlement gravitated towards the river crossings and the low-lying area, which was ideal for a marketplace to capture people crossing the river.
And Emily Bianchi Bazzi, I hope I pronounced that roughly right. Where were the burials found, and what age do you think they are? Were they all Roman?
They, as far as we know, yes, they are all Roman, and they were scattered. So there wasn't a graveyard or nor is there that normal. I mean, normally you're told that Romans bury their dead outside the settlement, but in 3 cases these bodies were in amongst the buildings. So there was also a child burial, which I didn't show, which was in amongst the buildings. That's more typical, but there was no obvious pattern that we could discern.
Right. Well, that's brilliant. That's all the questions answered. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Bill.
Thank you.
Well, Okay, Pam, thanks for asking those questions, and Al, thank you for the super answers. As usual, you've come up trumps for us. We've learnt a lot. I'm certain a lot of people will be wanting to pop across to Malton. Malton is also one of the food capitals of North Yorkshire, so it's well worth a visit. I think that we'll probably be heading over maybe next week, weather permitting. So yes, thanks, Al. Thanks. Feedback, please. Let's have your feedback, good and bad. We'll take it all on board and do what we can to put things right or improve things and continue as we are. Also, let us know what subjects you might like a webinar on, and we'll see exactly what we can do about that. Right. Okay, as Al mentioned, the book. We still have a few copies. I think we've got probably 40 or so left. If you do want a copy, and it is a good read, quite a simple read, lots of colour pictures and things inside, all about wonderful Thorntley Street, just give us a ring. It's available from here. The price will include post and packing. I'm not certain what the post is because it has gone up a little bit, but the details are on our website, and you could also phone us on 01845 527 717. We're glad to take your money and give you a nice book as well. Right, okay, well, again, we're begging, or perhaps not as much as we could be, but we haven't got any funding anymore. Everything that we do is self-funded, and we rely upon your donations, so please do keep them coming, small, large, whatever it is. They're always very, very welcome. I'll give you our bank account details just in case you feel minded to contribute. No obligation whatsoever. It's the bank account is Thorntley Street History Group with a sort code of, I should know this, but a sort code of 206146, and the account number is 034298881. So sort code 206146, account 034298881. Okay, thank you very much to those people that have donated. It really, really does help and supports us getting further webinars lined up. Our next webinar is next month. It's Thursday, the 15th of December. And again, we've got another old friend coming back, and that's Mark Newman, a consultant archaeologist to the National Trust. And Mark is going to be talking about one of his subjects, which is quite close to our heart, actually, as we're doing a little bit of work there as well, which is about Benningborough, the house just outside of York. And Mark is going to talk about Benningborough's Great British Dig Revisited, brackets, Hugh Dennis, that's included, close brackets. So that's going to be really, really good and really, really interesting. Okay, that's just about everything from us. We're always here. Just ping us an email. You could get yourself involved in any of our projects, anything that we're doing. Just get yourself onto our website and get yourself booked in. So until then, we'll look forward to you all keeping safe and staying well. And I'll just say good night.
Good night.
Good night.